Uh, you need to do the drop down in the corner. It's, yeah. Yeah. Or no, that would correct. And it had present. Do the drop down. Th-
Yeah, and the EDU is getting an update as we speak. You know, little by little, it seems, and they're posting new video content, and I believe they're going to roll out more soon.
Yep. I also think probably right now I think we might have 40 chapters instead of 25 because I think there's 3 new US chapters and quite a few in Asia. Like that map doesn't even show Asia at this point, so we need a new map. But yeah, we're growing fast, and if you want to make your own student club at your university or your own chapter in your local city or area, definitely reach out to Morgan or Brian. It's easy to reach out on Slack. We also have a Discord that we're trying to get people to use more so that they can have their own meetings outside of Jitsi or Zoom. Cool. Just started the meeting. It was very hilarious.
What happened?
Oh, Jessica is our main.
Hey Ryan, your mic's on.
The current chapter lead isn't here tonight, so me and
They say earbuds, but they've got the design akin. I see why they're doing that in the picture of the lady right there. They're probably using I would think they're using the back of the ears for reference. Maybe they put another thing right there. This reminds me of my what were they? Some Sony like exercise earbuds, and they had that design. It's been around for quite some time. Back in the 90s or early 2000s, they had that design. Yeah, like if I put on the Ultra Cortex at a Starbucks here in Louisiana, it would blow by half their minds. And if they ask me a question, I'm gonna be like, I'm actually using it to read your mind. I would mess with them a little bit, probably. I think actually going, I think actually going to the coffee shop probably would not produce the desired results of what they're trying to accomplish with the device. Like in the picture that you've got on screen right now, they're actually in like a small office or a home where they probably feel more comfortable than a shop where people can come in that they don't know. I mean, we already know that human faces register different than looking at cartoon faces, right? It activates a completely different area of the brain. So does human speech probably than synthesized speech from the old Windows or whatever. And you have both of those things in a coffee shop, and plus you have new people. It's not like, oh, that's so and so. I'll just get back to work, or you ignore it completely. There are, I think, bottom line is there are more distractions in a coffee shop than a common workplace. Yeah, there's a lot of that. And well, the chances that but I don't know why you're trying to work if you want to meet your friend for coffee. I don't know. That is a scenario. You'd be using the device at work, and then you'd take it to the coffee shop for an hour while you wait for your friend. Yeah. And in that scenario, there's even a reward. The reward is interpersonal contact with someone you know, but there's not always a reward.
I think another reward might, oh, look at this coffee shop is a work and this other stuff. I might show that to the people back at the office. Say, look, y'all want remote work, there's food, why it might be better. This that scenario. Yeah, like interesting thing is being able to measure it.
You're breaking up, man.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Hey guys. One thing I was wondering is, who here has actually played with like the consumer EEG devices? Because I did. I used the Muse years ago for like a proof of concept for like a wheelchair controller for quadriplegic patients. So we actually using EEG is like actually a living nightmare if you don't have actually like good models. Like what I found was using like your facial muscles are much more reliable. So like your jaw clench, your blinks, the actual gyro on the Muse for like head orientation, the response time, and then the actual detection that was on those devices were much better than actually processing the raw EEG and getting the features and like pumping something out. So yeah, like do you guys have any like stories on course with EEG or any other neural wearable stuff?
Well, part of that reason is because where the Muse sensors are located don't really cover the motor cortex area, so you're not going to be getting much of that signal at all. Whereas the Neurosity Notion actually has a motor imagery paradigm that works pretty well from my experience, and it's kind of one of the main selling points is that it's called their Kinesis API, and that uses that tries to take the signal from directly over the motor cortex versus just having electrodes placed around the forehead and getting the facial muscles.
Have any of you looked at FNERS devices or Meg devices? So like there's a company called Kernel. They do, I believe, like a whole head Meg plus FNER. So yeah, I've been like they're very secretive. Like can't really talk to them, but yeah, I haven't seen any APIs or anything. But that looks pretty interesting. I think you'll get shallow enough full brain data to do some cool stuff.
What was the name of that again? Can you type that in chat, please? You know, I'm not a neuroscientist or anything by that means, but it seems kind of obvious to me that if you want to look at concentration, maybe not focus or relaxed, but concentration, that's highly correlated to increased blood flow over an area of the brain. And I'm sure that has effects towards the outer part of the brain where you could pick it up. So it seems like a go-to for certain types of EEG metrics. Well, it's not an EEG metric. That's the cool part. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm actually starting a project.
Like, I think it's just another great metric to add to a project, honestly. Like, do that and combine it with EEG and you're in business. You could be looking at using one type of sensor for one metric and another for another, and then collate them together with another machine learning model, and you've got advanced metrics.
Yeah,
Hybrid
and
metrics.
looking at FNERs and things like that for actually figuring out some form of cognitive load to use as a calibration mechanism for question mark PCIs. So yeah, I think FNERs plus something else, and like multiple and getting and like using some sort of neurofeedback would suffice for an application like that.
EDA is even my therapist from like 4 or 5 years ago knew that EDA could tell you if a person was calming down or getting excited.
And an eye tracker might be a good thing to correlate FNIRS with, because pupil size should give you a pretty good correlate to cognitive load. So yeah, then you would have sort of a mapping between the eye tracker and the FNIRS device. It's definitely an experiment we'd like to do, just looking for a good FNIRS device to do it with.
How about building one?
Oh boy, that's tricky, but yeah, it's certainly doable. I think for the most part, having been through the hardware grind in a past lifetime, I try to avoid hardware like the plague, but that's just me personally. I have no ill will towards hardware of any kind. It's a glorious field to do battle in, and but boy oh boy, there can be a little trench warfare in there too.
Yeah, like I don't know. I guess I'm looking at trying to use off-the-shelf low-resolution CMOS sensors with like the infrared filter taken out of the lens. So like you can order like 100 of these for like $50, or something like that, and like kind of do like a CMOS array and basically DIY and FNIRS device, but like going through data sheets to figure out the actual IR response. They usually don't put that there, but yeah, like if I find something that's cheap and or has like a dev kit or something, I could try a stereo, like a stereo array, and see if it correlates with anything. Because like honestly, like, these things are they're like very priced up because the people paying for them are like the researchers who are actually buying these devices have grant money. So if you can make it more open source, if you can go towards like open source hardware, leveraging off of the smartphone supply chain, I think we can make devices that are affordable for like hackers like myself.
And I wasn't sure if Jaden was trying to say something, but yeah, please.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say you should look into the HEG device that I don't know if Josh is on the call right now, but it's sold through the OpenBCI shop, and that's kind of like it's not FNIRS, but I believe it's one like the same principle where it's like shining an IR light into the forehead and using something to pick it up to determine the blood flow. So that might be like a good place to start. It's I think it's called OpenHEG or no HEG do we know?
Okay, cool. I'll check that out. Could you actually drop that in the chat if you have it?
And
Yeah, I'll find the link for it.
Morgan's not here, but I feel it would be remiss to not talk about his favorite topic, optically pumped magnetometers. And in particular, Kernel this week, the mysterious startup announced the Flux. And so you got the Flow, which is the FNIRS device. So that's this one. This is the production sample, and I think they have some photos of people using it in the literature. But yeah,
Basically, it makes the section of the MEG. I have a EEG textbook, and they have a small section in the back of the textbook for MEG, and that's now ancient.
right, exactly.
You're going to show the pictures shortly. It's definitely not half the size of a room.
Right. So here's the kernel flow, and yeah, they have now the Flux, and it uses OPMs, and they had a photo in the email that they sent, and the photo looked amazing. But of course, it's not going to be in this, is it? Come on, nope, all kinds of stuff. So it reminded me of the piece of headgear that that gentleman from Kyle showed, with his research lab in the presentation. And it's fascinating that the giant room scale contraption is now available. Installation is now available as the kernel Flux. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, this is two pretty revolutionary products in a short time frame. So pretty interesting. I imagine that the kernel flow will have a little bit wider applications and maybe a little bit cheaper, but that's purely speculative from what I've seen so far. So I don't know if anyone knows anything more about the kernel Flux, but it's definitely cool that they're...
Hey, I've got the page. Here it is.
Okay.
Here's the page with the picture.
Nice.
Here, load that up.
All right, thanks.
Yes, that's the photo.
Yeah, can you string that real quick?
Yes, look at this.
Yeah, it looks like the size of a prototype for the FNIRS device.
Yeah, so if you remember Kyle's photos, these OPMs are huge. It has something to do with the angle and the that you need to shine the light and the length of the laser and all that other stuff. But yeah, this to me looks like a very easy to do at home type of stuff.
They put right above that picture what you're able to do. And I have to say this here at the meeting with y'all. Mm-hmm. It says number 2 is speak, gesture, and move as you would naturally.
Right.
I'm like, well, does that include jumping around like a monkey while I listen to EDM?
That's in version 2 of the Flux product.
Or headbanging to metal music.
Mm-hmm. The Flux Sport will do what you're looking for.
It looks like they don't want that lady to break that.
No, and it reminds me of like when people would practice postures, so they would put stuff on their heads. But yeah, it is really incredible.
Is that one sensor, or how does MEG work in that way?
It's a whole series of multiple sensors kind of pointed at your head at a like 90-degree angle to the scalp so that they can shine in. And so you need like the fiber optic wires to each, I guess, laser or accelerator that is sort of attached to that. But yeah, it's very bulky, unfortunately. I mean, clearly they were able to get the flow down to a pretty manageable form factor, but this is still, you can tell that the technology has form factor limitations that force it to be that size. So yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. And all right, so by the way, yeah, thanks very much for talking about your project, Syed. Let me ask if there's any people that have joined us for the first time. And if you have, I'm sorry, you picked the wrong week to join. But also, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please feel free to do so if you were inclined.
This is my first meeting. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Graham.
Hello.
Quick introduction, maybe. My name is Graham Briggs. I'm here because Morgan reached out to invite me. He saw something I posted on the Open BCI forum and reached out and said, hey, you might enjoy this event. So here I am checking it out and learned a few new things already because I think, as somebody already said, I am not a neuroscientist, nor do I play one on TV.
That's me.
Just kind of interested in the technology and fell into playing around with the Open BCI. So I'm here to learn some more and kind of expand beyond that, small little piece of it that I've seen so far.
Hey, Graham, I work at OpenBCI as doing software, so I help a little bit with software.
Awesome.
My main thing that I work on is the GUI, so it's important to keep that going so everybody can get started.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the first thing I had contact with and introduced me to starting to learn about the signals. It was a very important tool to get started for sure.
And Graham, do you mind if I ask if there's any particular project or area of interest? I mean, if you're using it to collect a certain type of data, or if you have something you'd like to be able to do?
Well, like most, non-neuroscientists probably that saw it, I wanted to drive the robot with the power of my mind, just like everybody else that
Right.
probably got started with it. I quickly realized that, that's a long way off per se. And in the meantime, I just have been developing some useful stuff. Collaborated with a couple of folks from the Open BCI community to kind of help them with tools or prototypes or whatever for their software projects. So I'm mostly thinking about, where do I go from here? What do I do next? What creates some value for myself or the community?
Do you have a hardware or software or engineering background?
I do. My schooling, I went to school and studied land surveying and geomatics engineering, which is measurements from satellites, laser scanners, putting it all on a map, all of that kind of stuff. And that is still my day job, although these days I manage a team that writes software that land surveyors or engineers would use to go out and measure and do their work. And I
Bet you're interested about mapping the brain since you can map the Earth so well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was, I like technology and kind of putter around with side projects. I work for this great company that has an annual competition, an annual hackathon competition. So last year I tried to win that competition by building a EEG hard hat that could read your brain. It was a lot of smoke and mirrors. Actually, someone was talking earlier in this meeting regarding, strong signals from, muscle, all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
At the end of the day, all we were really able to build was a hard hat that could detect when you blinked.
Right.
And then we coupled that with the accelerometer to kind of turn the robot around. Although we were able to check the box and say that it was a brain sensing hard hat because we could get it to detect alpha waves.
Right.
And when it detected alpha waves, it assumed that you're too relaxed to be on a job site, which would ergo or otherwise require a hard hat.
Right.
So it made a little haptic motor bzz inside the hat. So that's how I got into it in the first
I
place.
remember saying I liked it. I'm pretty sure I commented.
You saw that one? Yeah, I posted about that on the forum, and since then have been puttering away at various projects.
I either said it on the forum or I told somebody at work Like, this is serious. And I was thinking about this today. I have a good friend that works at Hilti. Have you ever heard of Hilti?
Yes, I have. Yes.
That could be a product that they sell, man, because they're trying to disrupt the construction industry. What more would disrupt them than that? Than having a project manager on site know that they've detected stress levels are through the roof. You put it like a heart rate in there too.
Right, right.
2 electrodes and heart rate inside a hard hat. Boom.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the concept. I'm also, interested to learn more, because again, my original goal was to build something portable and wearable that you could, use to remote control some other computer device or robot with or whatever.
That's like with the Notion. They said it was specifically over the motor cortex, and they look for those motor commands.
Okay. I guess, some of my early learning or discoveries, there's just so much noise when you move around. I mean, how do you deal with that? So, from what I know right now, and having been on a site or two where you need a hard hat, I find it hard to believe that EEG would ever be successful at working in an environment where I'm constantly moving my head. So I'm intrigued to know and learn more about how that actually works and
So
how
I'm
you deal
saying
with that.
it might not be all those electrodes. If you really focus on getting one contact with one electrode, and then maybe like the FNIRS or just EEG or EDA, some of those things where the best contact isn't really required. But that kind of makes it difficult for optical sensors because even a laser bouncing around,
Mhm.
even if it's moving within the tiniest space, I guess would give you variance. That's why the lady they just showed for MEG is. Did you say that was optically induced?
Yeah, OPM, optically pumped magnetometers.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Morgan is cringing somewhere right now, going, "No, that's totally wrong." But let me show you. But that's a really cool application. I've been interested in the industrial space. Neurable was doing some VR training experiments with like Turnbull or something, like a really big industrial safety company, whatever. And another interesting one that I saw, I'll share the screen right here. So Toby did this cool eye tracking study. Let me turn off the sound in a steel mill. So apparently the foundry has this one process where they pour the liquid metal into like a container, and that sounds pretty dangerous to me. And apparently it is quite dangerous because that's actually molten liquid metal Terminator style. So they had these folks wear the real world eye tracking glasses in the setting, and Pupil Labs has the same thing. So you don't have to go through Toby. There's an open source, like a similar to OpenBCI type version for the eye tracker, and it's called Pupil Labs out of Germany. And so they actually had the people doing
Here
the
for
pour. Sorry about the sound.
31 years, and I've
Come on. They had people doing the pour wearing the glasses, and it was pretty interesting. It looks like they were able to determine the experts, the ones that were qualified to do the pouring, how they did it. And here is a clip of just that, because I went through this once before. And it was
I imagine like somebody with a hard hat working from a harness in New York City.
Right.
I mean, it would work there too if you just make it so the glasses don't fall off.
Right.
Add a little
Right. And I think that
or attach it to the hard hat, really, and let them flip down.
Right. Or they do this with Formula One drivers, and I could see it with something like football players, but then again, the way that they get tackled, pretty sure you would be breaking some of these devices as well. So there is very much a challenge taking any of these devices into the real world. And
somebody at Columbia put the OpenBCI in a helmet, and it didn't matter when they hit the contact because it looked for concussions after the contact when there wasn't all this movement, like in they're walking back to the thing.
And that's exactly where I was gonna go with it, Richard. So apparently we're on the same page. So Graham, what I was gonna suggest is any motion is horrific to EEG data. There's no way around it. Whether you're standing and kind of like shuffling your feet a little or playing a sport, as soon as there's movement, the data is gone. Sometimes you can find an electrode that is so far removed from anything that it's fairly tolerant, but no matter what, it's super destructive. But like Richard was alluding, if you have, let's say, either an accelerometer or some way to measure the signal quality or the contact, you can look for periods where the person's relatively still and record during that time frame. So when it's noisy, when it's bad, basically it discards all the data because it knows that it's unusable. But when it can, like in that sports example, like after when they're sitting down on the bench or something, you could still do useful calculations. So I think it would be very industry specific and depending on the role and what they were doing. But ultimately, there is no way around the fact that movement artifacts in EEG are like oil and water. They just don't mix. And the closest thing I've seen to that was a device from Wearable Sensing. They have a very active electrode that it's called a common mode follower. And so they have it's like a ghost electrode that is fully functional, but is just using, so it's kind of like a mega reference, basically, is the best way I can describe it. They're not just using a clip, they're actually sampling, and then anything that is on that electrode gets subtracted out globally, and so you can remove motion artifacts a little bit, but it was still bad. Like, it wasn't horrific, but it was not great. So yeah, I don't think the challenge that you encountered, which is motion, when it comes to EEG, it's just incompatible.
Well, for what it's worth, like I said, I've already learned something new. I had never heard of before. Really, didn't know of other techniques. Vis-a-vis the infrared or the fancy lasers, whatever you want to call that one again.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, this is really interesting learning already. Yeah. So thanks for having me. I'll continue to listen and learn.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us.
It's nice to finally meet you. That was one of my, I really enjoy watching people's projects roll in as I'm, cranking away.
All right. Well, I thank you for the encouragement. I kind of a little bit reluctant. I mean, because it's really kind of a silly thing and very much a beginner thing. So,
No, I took your idea very
encouragement
seriously, and I think it could actually be a sellable product if it went through some iterations.
Yeah.
All right. We'll keep that in mind.
There's so few people doing any of these experiments that, yeah, that's surprisingly legit. So wonderful to have you. Okay, so for anyone else that would like to introduce themselves, if it's your first time, please let us know.
It's also my first time here, and my close bud, Mikhail, introduced me to this. And I gotta say, the 10 minutes, I already got introduced to a bunch of tech in the neurotech field, which I didn't know before. So this was super informative already in the first hour.
That's great. Welcome to the Hack Night, Syed. All right. Well, and it feels so strange to not be able to kick it to John Griff for an update on Well, actually, hold on a minute. Do we have anybody from the EEG Notebooks crew?
Yeah, that'd be me.
All right.
There's not really much to update. I think we're still waiting on the ethics review to come in, but we have our first full meeting tomorrow for all the main developers now. So we're starting a bi-weekly or monthly. I'm not sure how frequently they're going to do it, but so it's going to be myself, John, Richard. I think you're going to be there, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I can do, but I can program a little Python here and there.
And then we also got Ore and Eric on board as well. So we have a pretty solid team that we're going to be trying to get to work on providing more updates and adding more experiments and really providing more support for it 24/7.
Does Ore already have a job doing data science?
I think so.
Yeah, that's the impression I get from him. He seems like he's full-time data science. It's cool.
Yeah, I think for Microsoft.
I'm happy that you're doing full-time data science now too. Good for you.
Yeah, making some deep fakes basically. We have an app out if you want to do some meditation and wellness with an AI version of Deepak Chopra.
Man, I already done told a stranger, probably at least one stranger, maybe one family member about what you're doing. It's pretty cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it's cool stuff.
So interestingly enough, it seems like this meditation or guided experience space is absolutely growing over the past year or two, which is really interesting. Without getting too ahead of things, this feels like the first really interesting commercial application for feedback devices that is somehow in any way resonating with the general folks out there.
Yeah, I agree. I think particularly over the last year because everyone's been isolated and trying to find anything that will help them like, soothe the tension and not go absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and so it's wonderful. I think a few years ago we were all wondering what's going to be the first big BCI type thing, and like many people, I thought it was going to be VR. And VR is just fantastic, but the market issues where the adoption just hasn't been what they wanted, a few 100,000 units sold. Certainly that's getting a lot better. I mean, the Index, the Quest 2, the new HP devices, they're
I
just
just
wonderful.
saw that Bank of America or somebody is going to roll out VR instruction to all of its branches. All. Woo! It's a lot of VR.
Facebook is investing heavily into VR EEG through their acquisition of Control Labs recently. So,
well,
they've
they've got the resources to give themselves a discount on their own hardware.
Right. The Control Labs acquisition was a big deal because I was thinking that they might go more the IPO route. Not that what I think matters in any way, but I sort of saw them as staying a little bit independent because of the funding that they had, how many people they brought in, sort of the scale which they seem to be going for. Clearly they found a great relationship with Facebook and it worked out for everybody, and that's what they were looking for, so that's how they went. But at this point, Facebook bought the other eye tracker that was a competitor to Tobii, which was called iTribe. They bought that a few years ago, so those eye trackers are now specific to Facebook's technology and so on. The Control Labs acquisition was a big deal, and then obviously the Oculus acquisition was a big deal. So I haven't heard an announcement from them of something Galia-like or an equivalent, but I'm certainly wondering when that might come because I have to imagine that they're working on something similar as well.
So, at least from the job postings in Toronto, they are like ramping up on at least like PhDs to work on, I guess, a proof of concept for, I guess, cross-domain like eye tracking, EEG, gyro, Oculus, VR, so whatever experience device.
Right.
So I think I'd give it a couple of years until like a press release. So.
They're coming for you, Richard.
I mean, I'm not on the hardware team. I've explained this before.
It was the inclusive view, the corporate view.
Oh yeah. No, currently I help the Galia team with like we're modifying software so that they can test the device.
Okay. And the only thing I'm saying about Galia is it's such a natural, necessary tool to have a VR device.
Dude, I reread an interview from Connor, and he's like, "Yeah, we're going to open source most of it at some point." So by about the time that Facebook is going to have a device ready, we might have already gone through a beta program, shipped to other people, and then that's why they were saying 2 to 3 years out for it to be in the hands of the consumers who are using the apps, because we're given like the core people who want to start early now, and it's been like that with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi for decades now. The people who give them $1 million get the best version first, or $1 billion.
And because our company kind of looks at the esports market, we tested a lot of the hardware from sort of a usability standpoint. And some of these experiments, like what can you tolerate for 4 hours? It turns out some of these devices are not fun. Eye trackers, no problem. Some people do actually have a very, very slight sensitivity to the infrared. used in the eye trackers and actually feel like some slight eye fatigue when they stare at the eye tracker for a while. It was kind of interesting. And yet they also seem to get used to it. So that's
Can you
kind of,
see it?
it's near infrared, but it's
So there is
800.
a light shining at your eye, though.
Yes, there are 3 lights shining at your eyes. And yeah, it's very low power. It's just infrared light. Like if you were looking at your Wii sensor bar, you would have infrared light as well. But yeah, so the eye tracker is by far the most tolerable. You can use an eye tracker for however many hours you're using your computer, and since it's not something you wear, it's basically irrelevant to the person once they get used to it. But I find that all the devices that make physical contact, and this is something I mentioned to Morgan before, once you kind of cross 3 hours, get a little dicey. So for shorter experiences like watching a movie, and I think VR kind of lends itself well to this because a lot of times people don't do like 8 hours in VR. And I've heard that it's pretty trippy when you do spend like many hours and take the helmet off, and you're like, okay, which reality am I in for a few minutes? But yeah, so where what's interesting to me is sort of like, okay, when these VR devices with integrated EEG become more common, the Galia being the first and clearly the best. But when you have these other ones coming, what's going to be the compromises for the sensors and the electrodes?
Man, they started engineering cycles on this. Like,
Oh, really?
yeah, it did not start. What is this, 2021? I mean, they've been trucking on it for at least a year.
Right, of course.
And that's what I realized, and I've respected, and that's probably one of the reasons why I buy Apple computers is because I know that they have the resources to go through 50 iterations of the iPhone and have 20 of them up for vote at the end of the year on which one they're going to sell.
Right.
They might have pod teams, and each team is expected to make 5 new iPhones a month, and then they literally just get to vote all the engineers on like which one we're going to go with.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it's very interesting. I'm super excited to see
the best whenever you go through all that work.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see like how many electrodes are going to be the standard form factor for these VR kits. How aggressive the pressure systems are going to be, because that's always a trade-off. Like, do you go spring-mounted? Do you have the long prongs to get through hair and stuff? Those are usually uncomfortable. And then the other sensors. I mean, Galia's got like what, 6 or 8? Not picking.
Galia.
Galia is the official pronunciation?
Yes.
Okay, now I know. Look at that.
I think you might be getting it the other way from. It's a Latin word and it stands for helmet, but yeah.
Okay.
That's why it doesn't have. They haven't announced that it has an FNIRS device, and that's why I'm excited to learn about FNIRS, because maybe one FNIRS thing right here could add a whole new metric that none of the other sensors are covering.
Right.
And then once again, I'm not a data scientist either, but I know that the more data you have, and it's going to take a lot of work from a data science perspective. But you have to have the device first. Mm-hmm. You have to get recordings, mm-hmm. and maybe that's what prevents there being a lot of open access, high density EEG data. Is somebody has to afford this $100,000 kit, mm-hmm. then we have to approve a study, mm-hmm. just like we're trying to do with EEG notebooks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, clinical EEG has all these problems. It takes about 20 minutes to put on a 32, 64, 128 channel kit. There's usually going to be at least a few electrodes that have bad contact impedance, so that they need to be fixed. And the conductive gel that gets used for research is only good for about 45 minutes before it starts drying out. So it's tough to use.
In contrast, let's talk about EA Games testers. I don't know if you've seen this, but around colleges in the US, they have these little programs, mm-hmm. and they recruit college kids to come do testing for $20 an hour. I've heard they work them like really hard, but all they have to have is a computer and they can do the work.
Right.
And if you can get it to where all everybody has to do is make sure their hair isn't super oily.
Right.
Wash in the last 3 days.
Right.
And you just pop it on, jiggle it a little bit like this, adjust it back right here within 5 to 10 minutes. So
I agree, and that's why it's so cool. It's so cool to see, the new VR.
We're working on that. We want it to be quick for users to understand if they're getting a good signal or not. That's one of the things I'm helping on with right now. So
yeah, it would be really cool to have some kind of diagnostic display to kind of just show you what electrodes are working.
It would be, wouldn't it?
So it'll be interesting to see what the finished version.
No previews. No, only previews for no previews.
Totally understand, but it'll be interesting. So yeah,
looks
awesome.
great though. I got help. I got help from the team. It's great.
Now that's exactly what you need, and we had to code a little feedback dashboard for the Muse when we were using those for studies, because we would have college students come in, put it on, but if you have no idea how the electrode contacts are, then you're gonna get
my first try looks so bad.
Recordings that are like a box of chocolates.
The first version of everything always looks bad.
It's true. It's true. So, but it is really interesting. And then obviously, but Richard, you bring up a great point, which is the more data you collect, the harder it gets to interpret. I mean, if you have 16 channel data, it is not trivial to start filtering through that and figuring out which channels are relevant, what data are you looking for, so on and so forth. Very quickly, the complexity and the analysis times will shoot up. So that is very much a real.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. Do you guys have any open, open items on like the GitHub about that? Because like my day job, I do a lot of like lab automation, so calibrating random things out of the system is like it's part of everything. So maybe there's something I could look.
I think the Galia thing is still about a year away from beta, but the ultimate question of how do you collect dense channel, what do you do about stimulus and labels, and what do you do about all the sensors, because you're going to have eye data, you're going to have EEG data, and you're going to have other data as well. And so just getting all that together.
Part of the secret sauce.
That's
some secret sauce, as you just pointed out.
Yeah.
But on a thing that is a little more public, Andre just added like a marker mode to BrainFlow. And the idea is to kind of do some of the magic that LSL does, but in a simpler and more direct way by understanding when the time stamp came. I don't know. He could probably explain it better, or you can go look at it for yourself. But BrainFlow is trying to add something called a marker mode, and it will help. Because I'll just use the Cyton for example. Somebody named Gary Van Zyl to say, hey, let's just send a timestamp to the board over the serial port, and that's the time, right? But then there's a delay when it gets there, and then it has to come back. And then, because you're using a serial port, you just dropped 5 packets of data. So it didn't work out so well with the Cyton. Obviously, using Wi-Fi, you can maybe have two channels, one for receive and then one for send. It's not the problems like serial port. But Andre is doing it, I think, just on the software side. Right. That's what he's going for. He's trying. It doesn't matter what board we're going to use. Let's just do it on the software side because he maintains the software package. So,
and I think without a device clock, the only solution, and just like you're saying, is software based. What I've seen some manufacturers do is if you have clock, a CMOS type device that generates a timestamp that you trust because there is no latency, there is no whatever, it is just the device clock. There are ways that you can embed that or use that as a sort of de-jitter or timestamps. So yes, but that sounds like a great solution. It'll be very interesting to see the markers, because there's got to be a way to generate labels that kind of go with here's an interesting event. So,
Could I maybe ask a quick question?
please.
Just from a beginner standpoint. So I noticed, for example, OpenBCI records the GUI program records in a ASCII text format. You mentioned
Or PDF.
or BDF. So I was going to get to that. So you mentioned there's LSL, there's BDF. Both of those formats seem to be, they have their own following or whatever. What is the format or a format, or is there any sense in converging on something? I'm guess what is BrainFlow trying to do that Lab Streaming Layer doesn't do already? Or
He did a whole post on it, by the way.
Okay.
If you go to brainflow.org, he did make a post exactly about that. I'm not going to elaborate on that because Andre can speak for himself. But can anybody that's here speak to the value of BDF? I mean, we still, I remember fixing that code like a year or two ago in the GUI, and it hums nice, but I don't really understand who's using it the most.
I don't have any familiarity with BDF, but just sort of to take a stab at the difference between BrainFlow and LSL. LSL is a middleware transport layer. So it is completely content agnostic. It is completely hardware agnostic. It simply says if you have a data source and if you build an LSL stream using this library and these characteristics, then it will get broadcasted to the subnet, and you can subscribe to that stream from any device on that subnet, and there's going to be all kinds of cool tracking information that will abstract the timestamp muddiness. There is still some limitations, as in if the device is generating the data in such a way that is in the LSL uses a arbitrary epoch for time. It doesn't put everything in common time. It basically assumes that each device is just kind of off in its own world. And so this arbitrary timestamp will reset every time the device is rebooted, which makes looking at a LSL timestamp and reconstructing when it happened quite difficult, because the only thing you know is these are seconds since the device powered on. So the solution to that is to build the timestamp differently in such a way that you provide a Unix timestamp or a common.
And forbid that the device does a hiccup in the system clock
Yes, exactly. If there's latency on the Bluetooth, if there's latency on the device, or if there's latency on the OS, everything is terrible. And when it comes to timestamps, I think you can take that phrase and apply it to everything. It's just awful. But what BrainFlow does is provide a driver to certain hardware. So LSL assumes that you either have an interface from that piece of hardware to LSL, or that you're going to write one. So as long as you can get the data in memory, you can write an LSL broadcaster, and we've written a few when the device simply didn't have the LSL functionality and we wanted it. But no matter what, LSL still forces you to have some kind of driver, some kind of OS level interface to get the stuff from the device, and then you can pipe it to LSL. What BrainFlow does is it lets you interface with the OpenBCI board directly. So it has all the low-level drivers for you to be able to collect the data, but it doesn't necessarily pipe that data to this LSL layer.
You can pipe it. There is a streamer, and Andre loves the streamer, and I think it's a great idea because you can simply on one side say, I'm streaming gangland.
Right.
And then on the other side you say, okay, I'm going to listen for a stream on this IP address on this port. And by the way, it's a gangland, and everything will just work as if you had it right there. So he has that. But by the same token, people are asking for LSL. So we already proof of concept it. You can have a Python sketch with BrainFlow right here. Then you have LSL below, and you simply pull the data from the columns. It's a two-dimensional double array.
Right.
That's what BrainFlow returns.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily what LSL uses. LSL has chunks with timestamps associated with the chunks, and you can have X number of samples. So if your sample rate is 250, when we send out from the GUI or from the Python sketch, let's say it collects 10 samples a chunk, you get 25 chunks, 10 to 11 samples per chunk, and there's your 250 samples with 10 transactions.
Right.
25 transactions?
Yeah.
You do that.
Yeah, LSL was written to be very kind to device resources and network resources. And so when we write our broadcasters and our receivers, we turn all that nice stuff off, and we do horrible things to the network and the device. But yeah, absolutely. LSL still gives you the problem of how do you interface with the device. BrainFlow lets you interface directly with that device, and as Richard said, you can then pipe it to LSL. So they're just a little.
If you're only getting data, like I said with the chunk scenario, like with the Cyton, without I think they even tried a timestamp mode, and it's in the documentation, but I've never seen it really fleshed out. I think somebody must have tried, but it didn't. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But LSL, if you have 10 samples, you give LSL the timestamp of the first one, and it'll interpolate the rest of the sample timestamps based on your sampling rate. And it also, I think, tries to account for device drift when that sampling rate shifts a little bit from like 250 to 246, or it shifts a little bit above. Realistically, the Cyton on the hardware device is, people have asked this in the forums all the time. They're like, oh, it's fluctuating. And like, well, it's a crystal or something. It's going to fluctuate from 250 hertz 0.001.
Right.
But other than that, it's incredibly stable. So,
so yeah, I understood a lot about the how do you get the data from one machine to another, and then the transport layer. I was a little more curious though on file recording, right? Like what is a format if you wanted to record a file in a format that most people could use? You know, I see a lot of people on the forum, for example, talking about MATLAB. I want to get my real time or my post session data into MATLAB, or I wanted to get it in this package or that package. You know, and I've seen some standardization, or not even standardization. I've seen some tools and some source code around BDF. I've seen some source code around and tools around LSL. There's the OpenBCI with its text format. What's a good format to record this data in that would make it accessible to the most number of users?
It's an excellent question. So there is a lot of inconsistency in terms of which software packages accept what file formats. And it kind of is unfortunate because I don't think it's necessary, but it's definitely an issue. So
what does Emotive do?
Good question.
Hey.
So I'll check Emotive EEG data format.
What does Muse
EDF.
do? Muse LSL will split out as CSV?
So one of the common ones, so the Emotive is EDF, which is, I think, European data format. And that's a common one for EEG recordings for whatever reason. So EDF is a lot of them. The LSL uses XDF as a binary thing, but that's a very uncommon one to be able to import directly. The only one that I know that supports it is M&E Lab, and that's just sort of a feature that they seem to include. But there is a generic way to convert XDF to CSV through Python. There's a library called XDF to CSV, and CSV works, but then once again, if the particular application hasn't been written to import CSV, which for instance M&E Lab does not support, then you can't really import it. So I would say almost it's a function of what reader are they trying to use, and then that reader will probably be kind of strict on the format and the structure that it supports, and then ultimately you need the file to match that. I feel like CSV, EDF, and RTF are all solid text-based formats, and then XDF is a decent binary format when necessary.
Well, Jaden would probably be in favor of CSVs because he helped with the EEG Notebooks project. You there, Jaden?
I think he might have dropped off. But yeah, CSVs are wonderful. That's we store most of our data in either XDF immediately post recording, or we convert to CSV, just because that's something you can read on any OS with any spreadsheet with any whatever, and you can parse. The fact that Pandas makes reading CSVs so easy makes CSVs kind of an easy one to use, because it's not a lot of effort. But yeah, unfortunately, CSV has spotty coverage, so I would say that's a safe default, as is text, but there are going to be people that unfortunately won't be able to read it.
Okay, thanks. That's good insight.
Sure. All right, so we're getting up on 7:30. Hey, Ryan's back. Welcome back, Ryan.
Hello.
And yeah, so I don't see any other items for 7:30. But if anyone else has some projects they want to talk about, or news, is there anything that? This is a very open call this week. So
I know one thing I want to remind people about is that the Brains at Play game design competition or JIT hackathon type thing ends next Wednesday, or submissions end next Wednesday. So if you want to submit stuff, I would recommend doing it soon. There are 3 categories. I'll post a link in the chat, but it is a design competition. You don't actually need to prototype the idea, but the category that I think would interest quite a few people here is VR, BCI, and health. So it has to touch on, it has to be pretty much, yep, there we go. Yeah, so design fiction. So the categories, if you scroll down a bit.
All right, here we go. Submission categories.
Yeah. So brain games, VR, neurotech and health, and computational art. Yeah. The hard part is kind of creating teams, I'd say. Like right now I have ideas, but I'm still waiting for my friend to get back to me, who, like, whoever wins the VR, neurotech and health, they will get a pretty big prize and will have help actually prototyping their game or experience or health app. But the hard part with that is VR and health, because right now it's very hard for VR devices to actively help with certain types of health, especially if you have to incorporate EEG or stuff, because there haven't been nearly enough research, like projects around what EEG might be able to help health-wise with relation to VR. But it is an important thing that I think will be a big deal in the future as devices get better and more sensors get put on VR headsets and VR peripherals. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so that's the only thing I really can remember that's ending soon. Yeah. Also, respond to real-time data from more than 2 brains is kind of hard. But I think a couple people here have a bit of experience with trying to synchronize EEG headsets for controlling games.
Right.
Yeah. Which is going to be another big thing. VR 3-dimensional, like Pong and stuff, will be really cool. Or really just any game that any board game put in VR that you can control with your brain could be a lot of fun.
So, having worked on it extensively, let me tell you the really cheap way to accomplish that. Have one computer that's connected to two Bluetooth EEG devices. Sure, there's going to be different latencies and stuff. It's within a few hundred milliseconds. So, of course, it's not going to work over distance and whatever. Then it gets awful. But if
Syed was asking for a link to something. Is that to this, Syed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh yes, sorry. Here is the link to the Brains at Play competition. And to slightly bring up a different device, there. I don't know if any of you have seen the Cura AR glasses, but Kelly, the CEO, I believe.
Looks like nothing. What do they fit in there? I see one camera and a display.
Yeah, so this is pretty cool. This is a startup out of San Francisco, and it looks like things have kind of kicked into gear for them with this in terms of the production seems to be moving forward. So yeah,
They made it. Go scroll up. They made it. The size of the glasses look pretty thick. It looks like a triangular prism shape.
Yeah. I can't say too much about the current one, but as one of the early founders of Cura, yeah, there's been a lot of development in the past couple of years. Yeah, since I used to work with Kelly and some of the early founders and team members. But yeah, the tech for this stuff has been getting really, really good. Right now, it's more that computer tech needs to catch up with some of the visual stuff. And I don't know the exact make of the current like dot matrix. Actually, I can't remember which tech they decided on for this version. Like back when I was there, I helped them test a heck of a lot different.
Oh yeah, as part of the prototyping, I'm sure they tried a bunch of. But I do find it fascinating. I mean, HoloLens 2, which is probably the gold standard at the moment in terms of high profile, backed by a major company, really good implementation. They get a 50-degree field of view, and that seems to be one of the big limitations of it. So
does this mean what is being drawn, or like what the person can actually see? I hope it's what's being drawn.
Yeah, I believe it's the ability to what parts of the visual field can you interact with?
Because if you literally expect somebody to work and you put on an XR device and they have 15% view, it's like putting on horse blinders.
So one thing,
but it is kind of like that when you're only interacting with 15%, and that's probably their point here.
No, 15 degrees, and also all of those are actually not all that accurate because of the curvature, and our eyes field of view is drastically different width from height overall, and so that's also one reason why some VR headsets don't say their overall field of view, because pixels per degree, and there's a lot of different issues with there is no standard for measuring field of view at all. So everyone measures it differently, but right now the biggest one you can get easily is Project North Star, which has about 100-degree field of view. But yeah, the HoloLens 2, Magic Leap, and yeah, so that stuff, that's back when I was helping them out a bit.
Cool.
I don't remember which each one of those is, but yeah, the tracking's been figured out pretty well. And I think they solved any drift issue. Now it's just optic pipeline. And yeah, so it's going to more than likely be tethered to a pocket computer so that you don't have the problems of Google Glass where you have a computer on your face that heats up to 130 degrees. Like I almost got in second-degree burns from Google Glass when I was recording a conference talk for an hour and a half.
So Google Glass technology lets you take a meeting that's emotionally painful and have
Yeah,
it become
yeah.
physically so. No, I got it. So, but I will say that it's fascinating. I mean, you've been there through the tough times, Ryan, and so I just have to say it's really, really cool to see the latest progress from Kura, and very excited to see when they have a beta or prototype version that's shipping to people to try.
Yep. Yeah, it should be pretty cool. Oh, good. They finished a couple of those demos finally. Yeah, there was a lot of work on trying to actually get some demo animations that would actually work, because back in 2016, 2017, designing AR stuff in really any applet software was pretty hard to do. Yeah.
And I hope this is the first of many good AR successors. But yeah, another tech that sort of, over the past few years, I think we had all been hoping to see where is the promise going to come through.
Yeah.
And it looks like pretty soon is the answer. So there you go.
Yeah, though it's bound to be pretty expensive. I put the beta units, if they're currently using the tech, I think they are probably above $3,000. But they also finally got some decent investment. Like, investment was the really difficult thing back when I was there. Just like, even though there's so much tech that it's easy for the tech people to understand, investors just don't seem to care about long-term gains. They want companies like Uber that literally jump up to unicorn status in under 2 years, which is very unsustainable.
And I remember hearing that Uber is just now cash positive.
Oh yeah, they're
at billions of dollars of loss with the sheer promise of, yo, we're gonna make it back. Don't worry.
Yeah,
20 billion in. We've turned the corner, folks. We've turned the corner.
Yeah. They're only profitable in a few cities. It's just like WeWork. San Francisco's WeWork was the only profitable one in the world. And if you can see some of their public information, and it is horrendous. They were leaking billions of dollars a year, pretty terribly. But yeah, I mean, startup money often ends up like that. Luckily, it also seems neurotechnology stuff's finally getting decent investment. Yeah.
And So it is awesome. I have to admit that the situation with investors is pretty shocking. Ryan very well points out that basically for a lot of startups, they don't really want to talk to you unless you have an existing customer base and are growing and are making money. And I always ask some of these investors point blank, like, why would the startup need your money at that point? And they say, to grow even faster. So apparently there is some collaborative relationship, I don't know, where if you're on a growth trajectory, you get to go on a rocket ship to the moon if you get an investor.
Even when there's times you shouldn't be doing that, which has, like, if you actually ever go to any startup liquidation sales, which are a lot of fun.
That sounds. I don't know if they have that in Louisiana. That sounds like a San Francisco thing.
Might be a local event.
I mean, it's a product of a broken system.
Maybe they have some in Austin.
Yeah, there's some in Austin too, but the Bay Area, like, there's a few, like 3 companies that handle a majority of startup liquidations, and they say 1 out every like 7 startups fail from their perspective. Like, they are dealing sometimes with 5 failed startups a week.
Right.
In just the Bay Area. Like, it's pretty bad, but it's also a great way to cheaply buy up some hardware that is usually way more expensive. Or if you want like 1,000 standing desks and 1,000 ergonomic chairs, it's a pretty easy way to get it.
Well, it's an interesting parallel to the music industry, that the way that the record companies are structured, it's far more beneficial for them to have a superstar act than to have an act that's moderately successful. And that seems to kind of bear out in so many industries, that you get a little bit of money from someone that does okay, but better to have 9 people wash out and then have one super mega unicorn breakout hit than it is to have 10 sustainable companies. And I think that math makes sense for investors, but it is unfortunate for the companies involved.
Look, I found a new rap artist, and I listened to it. I downloaded his album and listened to it a few times rather than stream it. I know that's like an old school concept now. But I enjoyed having it on my iTunes, that I didn't have to wait for the internet connection, and I know there's no lapse in quality of the stream, and I don't have to pay extra for a 320 kilobits, whatever. But anyways, I saw this guy, and then I found out he was under Universal Music Publishing. He was on Interscope, which has been around for a while. But then I looked at the artists on Universal Music Publishing, and it just looks like they bought every half-sized label in the whole world. They have like Billy Joel. They've got Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift isn't under a country label. She's under Universal. They probably bought it, or they funnel these people up, and then like at the top you've got like Taylor Swift, Post Malone, and like the guy that I found on Interscope, he's got 4 million views on his most popular song from his last record. Post Malone has billions of views on many songs, billions. Like it, y'all were talking about just funnels in the music industry up to the top. I mean,
and that's the thing
about this guy who I enjoyed as much as a top tier artist and listened to his album many times, but yet he doesn't get that recognition because he's not being funneled like Post Malone is.
Exactly. And I think that seems to be a problem in many industries, but in particular the neurotech and BCI space has been having a lot of issues where if the company is relatively successful, they get bought, and now they have a new owner, which I think happened with EGI, got bought by Philips, and the support for those really good EEG amps sort of dried up a little bit. So it is very much an issue in this neurotech industry.
Doing something that we should know about?
No, Philips bought.
They also buy up geodesics.
Yeah. EGI.
EGI is Desics. Yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry.
But,
right.
Yeah, that's like being bought up is like the big thing. That's also what the startup industry, like, pretty much investors invest in things that they know a big tech company will buy up. Like,
Right.
a lot of investors at Kura are the type who want Apple or Google to buy Kura, like more than they want Kura to be successful. That was also the reason why Oculus got bought to a degree. Like, there were issues at times I heard with funding, but like the Bay Area is not a great place if you want to start a long-term company. Like, if you want your company to be around for 100 years, like Sony or LG or Kodak, you don't want to have a ton of shareholder investors who want you to get bought up.
Like IBM, a few research arms have published work that they've done with an OpenBCI headset. One example, I think, is like some group out of IBM Australia. But like, that's just some tiny lab with 20 people in it, and IBM has all of this money, but yet they don't want to create a device or buy a company that has devices so that they could gather data. Muse, on the other hand, spends all this time trying to say, what can we strip down probably so that we can get a device in people's hands so they can use it now. And I'm scared like IBM could just swoop in and buy all of Muse's anonymous data from 4 sensors, feed it to Watson, and game over.
Yeah, of course, and that's the thing. You know, you don't know what's going to happen later. In the example you gave about the record industry selling your library on to someone else, or in the case of user data,
you already know what types of songs are going to sell too, even in the rap genre.
Exactly. And in the same way, like, one has no, you might be comfortable sharing your data with Interaxon today. They get bought tomorrow. Guess what? Whoever bought that data can do whatever they want with it. And so it's a really interesting time in the BCI space. So I figure since we have a slightly smaller meeting this week, because Morgan's not here, I know it's terrible. I just wanted to ask some of the people that join, Manuel, Syed, or Bruno, whether you wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about your projects, not putting you on the spot, but we are at your disposal to offer terrible advice should you look for some.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, we're working on a project related to mental state recognition, particularly on affective state recognition. We work with a mix of deep learning, EEG signals, data we gather from open repositories, and we are also working on tutorials or educational content for people in Spanish, people in our region that may want to get into neurotech or want to learn a little bit more about neurotechnologies. We're also trying to work on a project related to the mix of game engines and signals captured from EMG activity, neuromuscular activity, electroencephalography, and see how can we combine effectively these types of technology to get a working prototype of a game. It's still a work in progress. We are learning a lot on the way.
Yeah, even before the Galia stuff, there are a lot of cool games that could be done with EMG, and I don't think it's out there yet. There aren't any what's the coolest thing is the glove. But Manuel, I said congratulations earlier that you're getting the free device from Terran.
Yeah. Sorry.
I want to celebrate that with you here. High five. Yay.
Yay! Thank you very much.
Congratulations. I'm glad. I hope you may need to re-upload the firmware because it's a kind of old device, but I hope you put it to good use and put it through its paces.
Yeah, sure. Maybe we will need some help, and maybe I can send somebody
Yes,
a message.
we'll be here on the forums. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks to the goodwill of everyone, and we're sure trying to do our best and keep working on projects,
Sure.
keep
And
working on
if you
our
don't mind me
technology.
asking a question or two, so in terms of game engines, the one that I hear all the time is Unity, which I'm guessing are you using that one as well? Okay,
Yes. Actually,
excellent.
we're working in Unity.
Excellent. So, pardon my ignorance, but it seems like that is the engine of choice to try to pipe data because of the various plugins and connectors that it has.
Yes, I mean, if you don't have a high-end computer,
Right.
you can't really exploit Unreal Engine or engines more sophisticated.
Right.
We can work perfectly with Unity.
Mm-hmm.
It runs on my toaster,
Yeah.
so that is great. So that's the reason why we stick to Unity. We have a lot of tutorials. We have a lot of resources online. Maybe when we get better hardware, we can work with more sophisticated engines like Unreal. Like it's one of our dreams. Actually, it's one of our goals. Unreal is amazing for all that I see, and
Right.
they recently developed Lumens,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember the name of the other technology that make it super efficient when you have very complex meshes like a million or billion triangles. So
Right.
working with that kind of technology will be absolutely awesome. But Unity has a lot of stuff, has a lot of good resources, and is ideal for if anyone is starting with games or mixing biosignals, using games or making visualizations. I use it for a project with kind of medical visualizations and
What
regarding hearts, and it was great.
everything that Manuel is saying is true because I also picked up Unity for the first time to make sure that the BrainFlow integration worked just as Andre promised, and it did. We made it a little better, but I got stuck wondering what I should use for machine learning in Unity C Sharp.
I saw this plugin that is Nugget, K-Nugget, something like that, that lets you use uh, libraries from Python and other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can use Keras inside C Sharp code. Then I saw this work related to TensorFlow and agents like used for reinforcement learning.
Did you say NuGet for Unity?
Yes, it's something like NuGet or KNuGet. Maybe I can I can I can take a look later. But right now
Mm-hmm.
I'm working in a different flow in a different workflow. I'm
Okay.
using Python. I'm
Mm-hmm.
using BrainFlow
Mm-hmm.
and making an online classification and using another library that is called Keyboard
Mm-hmm.
inside Python. And that is what I'm using as an input for Unity. So Unity is expecting an input,
Mm-hmm.
get key function,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm using this other library, keyword from Python to use to generate the input.
Okay.
So
So
that is
the
easier.
the Python library does the classification and
Yeah.
sends its label as a keystroke to Unity.
Yes, exactly.
Super awesome. And it sounds like you're also looking at the affective, so the emotional response that people are experiencing.
Uh, we've been working with that data set that is open source.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Gamimo. It's Game Emotions data set. It's related to the effective answers, to the effective states.
Could you type that for us?
Yes, sure. I can link you the data set actually.
It's hard when people.
Oh, no, this is
So
awesome,
when
Manuel.
somebody's-
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. When somebody's playing a game, they actually have an effective response, and you can maybe try to classify that response and associate it with a different type of game or gameplay. Like if you're playing something related to a scary game or something like
Oh yeah, okay. So this is a cool data set. I'll just share for a moment for the screen. By the way, Manuel, thank you so much for explaining this. Just give me 1 sec to pull it up, and then maybe you can explain to us the features that you're using. But yeah, so it looks like this data set has 28 subjects from an epoch, an emotive epoch plus. So they did 4 different games classified as boring, calm, horror, and funny. 5 minutes, and so you get 4 5-minute recordings, one for each category. Gotcha. 20 minutes of data per subject. And then there's the standard psychological metrics that get used for these things, which is arousal and valence. And so, like,
this is what we were familiar with already with doing some whenever we made a little in the OpenBCI documentation, you'll see something for like kittens, puppies versus kittens.
Right.
But Guillermo, who's done emotional stuff, he said you really only you get the best results from these data sets with a wide range of emotions.
Right.
Yes, and I can agree on that. It's not.
I was laughing because I was wondering what they considered funny.
Yeah.
I guess everybody considers a fart joke funny. I'm not sure.
No, humor is very specific. It's a great point. So there's the really fancy commercial version of this. Not that I'm implying that this is somehow better, but just more like this is what marketers want to know, and who are we to question what's being sold to marketers? But yeah, Affectiva has these 16 emotions that they sort of map, and they have these various demos.
And it has to be clustering from positive and negative valence. That's what I was getting after with the image sets. Right. Is the one that I used, I forget the name of it right now, but it basically mapped everything into X and Y plane from 2 metrics, valence and arousal.
Right.
And did clustering from there to decide how they should be grouped and what they are.
Yeah, and it's hard to find like a good YouTube example of the Affectiva API, but there is like, yeah, here we go. Here's an example of what this looks like. So as people are watching this content, there is charts that go with it, and you can see the subject, and theirs is based on facial recognition. So they're going for stuff like mouth and eyes and all the other anchor points that they usually go with for those things.
They use it at the Alex Peak used it for a emotional chatbot that he prototyped at a hack night at the garage a couple years ago, but right. Affectiva took away their free Unity plugin.
Yes, Affectiva used to have a really cool thing where you could try the stuff for free and use it non-commercially, but like many things in this decadent age, it is lost to us.
Yeah, but there are a few open source variants that I know Alex Peak has been trying, and I've looked in after Spirit AI, the I'm blanking, voice and generative text tree system kind of closed its beta a couple of months ago.
Mhm.
I've been looking into text like generation stuff a bit more, where you write like the start and end positions of a conversation, but allow it to generate any in between text, and and you're able to base that off of external like settings. Like one of their demos at GDC had hooks for eye tracking, facial analysis, and I think they were going to have EG or EMG. The data set that you could use to affect the like the discussion happening, where the AI would partially respond to how you are feeling and also your tone of voice. So like if you're yelling at the AI, it would respond very differently than if you were talking calmly to it.
So, okay,
I
this
could
is
probably use such a feature. It would help me regulate my emotions better.
so the data set here. The thing that was interesting to me about Affectiva was their claim of sort of 16 different distinct emotions, because from what I've seen, it works better with broader categories like in this data set, where you're basically saying this activity is boring or calming and relaxing.
Yeah, think of that.
scary.
The one with 16, they're like, hey, let's just go up a whole order of magnitude.
Right, exactly. Like let's
Four,
make
four times four, and so that means the clusters are that much smaller.
right.
Which, okay, if let's say we have a finite square and this is all of the emotional responses that we regather, you cut that into four and they're only so big. The only way to actually increase that would be like increasing the megapixels on a camera and have a wider distribution of the emotions, which is, I don't know how you do that.
Right. And this is EEG, that's face tracking, so maybe they have additional, variations like, okay, well, if just like the other one, but the mouth is turned down instead of up or whatever. But this data set with this EEG certainly matches kind of like what I'm more familiar with, which is let's try to be more general with the buckets and be descriptive. So
can you share that link?
Yes, right here. It's in chat.
But the one that Manuel shared, that's they say they're looking for 4, and that's very doable. That's what I've seen already in existing research.
Right, and so okay, you've got these categories. You've got the Unity game engine. I'm just trying to get a feel for what you're doing with the project. Don't worry, I'm not interrogating you. But how are you trying to identify the type of content the player is experiencing by their brain signals?
That is a question we ask ourselves until this, because maybe what we were trying to do was classifying the game rather than the emotion through the signals, because you see that the theory of emotion is very complex, and trying to reduce the spectrum of emotions a human can feel to 4 quadrants is very basic. Maybe emotions are not that discrete, and maybe emotions are actually more continuous. So it's very hard to put a line. What is the difference between fear and I don't know, stress or something related. And most of our models of emotions don't make a very good contrast. So it's very ambitious for us to say that we were actually classifying emotions as a whole. because maybe we were actually classifying games, thinking that we were classifying affective states. It's one of the problems with the theory we have. We are very limited in this space.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's
Also,
more
you.
about all of that, about the theory of emotions being complex. There's even primary there's if you look at theory of emotions on Wikipedia, you'll see the wash of any. If anybody wants to look at this later, you'll see a bunch of theories. There's one that I think is particularly accurate and broad enough to work, and I don't know. It says that there are primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions. Like there's an emotion, and I think that is probably what happens. Even like with grief, I was told in special education, you don't just tell a family that their kid has a disability, because you will trigger the grief process. And there, at any point, any parent or family could be in anywhere in that, from denial, I think is the first one, to ultimately accepting and living with it. But there's like 5 or 6 stages, and that emotional process could take years, it could take seconds. But even with small things like video games, there's probably an emotional process for feeling whatever you feel most specific at the end, which is specific hatred towards the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
That's not as same as hating your brother, because you love your brother and your sister, but you hate maybe what they did, right? So there's a broader emotion, then there's a less broad category, and then there's an even smaller category of emotion that's specific. Even the word love in biblical context has multiple words with multiple meanings, but in English it's one word.
Yeah, and regarding that, not all words, not all emotions are actually have English equivalents. So
Exactly.
some emotions that are in Spanish maybe are different in German or are different in other languages. And
One of the famous examples that from India is the little head nod thing that they do over there. It's not yes and it's not no, it's something specific to that culture.
yeah, exactly. And you have to take into account this cultural factor. It's been interesting though. I think that there is more potential using simulated experiences like video games rather
Yeah.
than just static images or video clips, multimedia archive.
Absolutely. And let me just ask a little
Yeah.
bit about the experiment that you were performing. So, how many different games did you have people do?
Oh, so the data set actually has 4 games. Um, I don't think that it's that we can that we get into trouble if we name the games.
Oh, no, 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 no. Sorry. Are you just trying to replicate the experiment from their data, or are you collecting some data of your own? Okay.
We want to collect data now.
Okay.
This is one of our goals actually. We were uh, processing this data set, and now that we may be able to do something more specific, more experimental regarding that.
Okay. So you were trying to identify the emotional state of the subject based on the 4 category labels. Did that?
Yeah,
Did you get decent results with that? How did that go?
I can say that we got something like decent, but definitely it can be improved. I mean, we used a mixture of Morlet wavelets
Mm-hmm.
approach
Mm-hmm.
with deep convolutional neural networks, specifically the inception networks. Um,
Oh, okay,
I
right. So you went all the way to Keras, took the Morley wavelets. I'm guessing that you generated the scalograms.
exactly.
Oh wow.
We
Okay.
work with programs, and we try to use transfer learning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we try to train our own weights on our network.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, actually, the second approach worked a little bit better,
Right.
but we, due to COVID, we couldn't use our more specialized computer that is in our lab.
Right.
We used only Google Colab, and the GPU they share with you. And we're trying to find a space, trying to negotiate with our university to go into our lab and do the proper work with a more specialized GPU, more powerful GPU, and
Yeah.
that can improve our results.
Yes. When we experimented with the various types of networks, we found that the more simple networks, like convolutional networks, they train very quickly, and it's no problem. But the deeper visual networks like VGGNet, Inception, ResNet,
Yeah,
AlexNet, Google's, whatever, um, those can be very training intensive because they have so many layers and so many filters and so many things in their architecture of pooling and so on. So, it's really interesting when we tried like CNNs. Some of those train in like 8, 10 epochs. It's just unreal. So you're talking like, depending on how much data you've got per epoch and how long it takes to process. But sometimes you can train a convolutional one in like 5 minutes, whereas an epoch on ResNet sometimes takes an hour and a half just for one. And you're going to have to do 50 or 60. And that's on a good GPU. And these things are very, very GPU bound. So
yeah.
you were able, that's quite a lot of work, by the way, to get the Morley wavelets. And then I'm assuming you used sliding windows or like, did you pick some
Yes.
static period? I'm guessing 2 to
Well,
4 seconds, something like that.
we divided the signal into segments.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we tried. I don't. I think it was 250 milliseconds,
Mm-hmm.
something like that, something
Mm-hmm.
around those lines.
Okay.
And we segmented the signal, and we used that to train our models rather than a sliding window. It was actually it was very challenging at first because we didn't know that much about DSP,
Mm-hmm.
and we start by reading books about DSP, like what is DSP,
Right.
and, and starting from that point, and we find very useful knowledge based on internet that allow us to get there. We definitely have room for improvements and more solid knowledge that can really help.
Yeah. So the EEG data is tricky. It's there's so many complications. Like when you're generating the scalograms, what palettes do you use? What frequencies do you use? What
Yeah.
time frames do you use? The one suggestion I would have, not that you're going to iterate on it or whatever, is that if your data is fairly static, then longer windows are easier for these networks to work with. So
Interesting.
obviously I'm not sort of questioning anything that you're doing, but if you if you
Oh, please
try
do.
if you try something like a 4 second window, or you can even expand it, but I think 4 seconds would be pretty good. One of the issues with those visual networks is that they don't have a sequentiality or a temporal component. So that's another thing that we really struggled with is if in the data the onset matters. If the horror game creates a very strong response at the 2 minute mark, that kind of fades around 2.5 minutes, and that's not present in any of the other data, then that's going to be something the network can identify. But if you look at the way that they train, typically what's going to happen is your whole data set gets sliced up, and then Keras will feed it in randomized to the network, and the network treats each slice as its own thing. So it kind of has no memory of the image that it saw before or the image after. unless it's going to be updating its weights. And so if you give me a moment, I can pull up some of the, when we were experimenting with the same thing, I can show you some of the scalograms that we generated. I think these are on 2-second windows. And yeah, but in our testing, shorter time scales gave us worse results than longer time scales, as long as whatever you're measuring isn't somehow super transient, where you know, you're expecting it to be half second, and so you don't want any more data than that.
Great, great. I'm sharing in the chat the page of our student club.
Oh, awesome.
You can actually access the collab, the collab code we have, and take a look with more detail, a more detailed look.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, yes, and it's got the links to the data set and so on. Yes, that's great. Let me just search predict color. All right here. Cool. So let me pull up some of the training scalograms. So for those of you wondering what this looks like, there's a couple of different ways that you can try to train a neural network. The most obvious conversion that some of you, if you kind of take a look at a Fourier, the converting a Fourier into a PIC looks like this. So in this particular case, the low frequencies are up top, and what that means is, you know,
Yeah, it's a spectrogram.
Right.
Yeah, I made one of these from scratch. What fun.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll have this in your Winamp, and this is what it looks like if you just take your FFT and generate a spectrograms. The scalograms through Morlet wavelets look pretty different. And what's cool about that, or sorry, the Morlays are okay, and I'll show you some of those here. But we found that there was a regularity to the dots and an aspect that didn't capture the differences quite as much.
What is this graph? Is
What's
the X time, and obviously is it time over frequency with amplitude as color?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Morley wavelets were decent, but we found the best shape differentiation using complex Gaussian 3. And the value is kind of like the number of cycles. But we found that it generates things more like this, which generates more distinct shapes for the network to sort of latch onto. So I think that this is more distinguishable than the Morley kind of like series of dots pattern that it seems to show. So like this one feels like it's always a set of dots. It's just that the position and the height changes quite a bit. Sorry, this is a bunch of bad empty data. Yeah. So, but it's always a structure that has this kind of thing. So that's not as much shape differentiation. What's that?
Is this EEG?
Yes.
Or something?
Yes.
What's the maximum frequency for the FFT? What is it? It's from 0 to, or is it from 5 to 50 or 1 to 100?
2 to 50, I believe. So yeah, these are in time. But
that's a lot of data, though. That's certainly enough to feed to a visual network.
Yes.
Just from doing this from scratch.
Absolutely. And the only thing I'll say is if you're going to go through the trouble of generating wavelets, the Gaussians generate better shapes. So complex Gaussian over Morley was better for the testing that we did.
Thanks for showing something visually so I could participate.
Yeah.
Because when you're just talking about it, there's nothing for me to latch on to, but I am familiar with spectrogram and FFT over time.
Yeah, precisely. So the training that we did, let's see if I can grab some that actually have something other than blue. With these shapes, tended to generate better.
Yeah, that looks like some really intense focus.
Right, right. And
I guess you would classify all of this right here as calm.
yeah,
That looked like maybe somebody moved.
the first experiment that we tried was whether we could recognize the color that somebody was looking at from their EEG. So a little different than emotion, but we would show one of four primary colors: green, yellow, red, and magenta.
There you go. You're back.
And so, yeah, the idea was to try to see that. Let me tell you, I'll skip to the end. Yeah, sure can't detect what color they're looking at in EEG very easily. But yeah, this is so longer and Gaussian instead of Morlet. Those two things seem to improve our accuracy.
I'm sorry, which ones?
Complex Gaussian wavelet. So complex Gaussian wavelet. There are a handful of wavelet families, and
Yeah.
Seagal. Are you using like the Python wavelet PyWT library?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So in PyWT, it's called CGAU3.
Okay.
So if you're calling the Morley wavelet now, I think that would be called CMORL, CMORL.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so you're gonna call CGAU3.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
And try 4 seconds instead of whatever. Or if you've already got a thing, try just expanding it. Do 10 seconds. Do something absurdly long and see what you get.
Great.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I hope when you get access to the lab and you train, you can sort of see what the results are. One of the experiments that we're working on is Ori's working on, and we're tangentially looking at is feeding EEG data into GPT-3 to replicate one of the cool studies about word vectors. So that ought to be interesting as well. Mm-hmm.
That will be awesome.
So that would be really neat to see whether some of this data can be interpreted in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking that maybe we can use computer games that are already developed, or maybe we can try to implement our own versions of computer game-based scenarios to work with some specific responses like fear. I think fear is more easily triggered,
Yes.
more
Right.
attractive, even more than happiness, because people get happier with different things. But
Can you describe? Have you done any research on fear? Like, and it's hard to get it ethically approved, I'm sure. But one of the examples that I think Connor has mentioned in passing was somebody's plank. Basically, you're on top of a building and you go look off the top of an edge, and that should evoke a response in almost everybody.
Yes.
yeah. I saw
Walking
that.
the plank simulator. Sorry.
Yes. I always forget the name.
Can you describe anything that you've noticed from fear, like increase certain power bands in certain areas, or is it more abstract and you leave it to machine learning to do it?
By now, only to machine learning, but I definitely need to check more details.
And I think, Manuel, you bring up an excellent question, which is it testing what is the game, or is it distinguishing the emotion? What our testing has indicated is that different tasks generate very, very different EEG signatures. So somebody on a computer reading something versus watching a YouTube video versus playing game number 1 versus playing game number 2, they all generate completely different signatures. And what's interesting is if you have them do the same task again, it's quite similar within the task. So it does very much seem like people have this sort of unique representation of what a task looks like. And we've had remarkable success training convolutional classifiers to identify what task someone is playing. We've gotten 94, 95% accuracy on that. So clearly, distinguishing the task is really easy, but everything else gets tricky. And not to downplay, the meaningfulness of detecting the task, but the applications of that are fairly limited. If what does one do with the knowledge of, okay, without looking at your screen, I can tell what you're doing. I guess that's cool if you're at work doing surveillance on people, but it's kind of sinister, for a lot of things, whatever. But what I think, if you wanted to distinguish emotional response, you would want to have some way of having the stimulus be similar, I think, and this is just a suggestion for when you do your recordings. See if you can get the same game, but one way where they would be really happy and the other one would be really sad. Psychologists do like Richard was alluding to, like for happy, they'll show you photos of kittens and puppies, and for sad, they show you like war zones and, civil war in the Middle East and all those terrible things. But one way or another, if you keep the game or the stimulus the same and you can modify sort of the emotion that you think that they're playing, that should start to give you a good idea of where those differences come in.
Yeah, it's actually pretty complex. And we were also thinking about maybe changing to another problem because of the scale of trying to recognize emotions. Like emotions are more physiological related.
It's really refreshing to hear you discuss how hard it is for emotion recognition, as opposed to seeing these devices come out and say, we're going to make you feel better. The struggle that you describe is more akin to what I've read in papers.
We have a lot of problems. If you look at the theory behind,
I thought I was going to create an emotion recognition company like 4 years ago. And now I'm more grounded in reality. And I really just, I want to apply positive and negative valence to the color of the room. Something.
Yeah. Like psychologists try to make a difference between emotions and feelings. So maybe what we were trying to classify was more
feel cold,
like a feeling rather than an emotion. Oh, well, I don't know. It's hard.
You ask somebody how they feel, and they might actually say, I feel cold, because their actual senses have taken over part of their emotional processing. I don't know.
Yeah, and the problem is harder if you ask men rather than women. If you ask men what are they feeling, they respond with what are they thinking. And I think that women are more able to make the difference between what they think and what they feel.
I'm sure we would find that in many cultures, not just North America.
Yeah,
but there's an aspect. When I said I wanted to create an emotion recognition company, there was also a side of it that I knew that could be done with just minimal data from the neurotech side of things, which is creating and synthesizing emotions from just raw computer networks. There is no EEG data. There is no telling it how it should feel. The computer decides on its own based on its knowledge and ontology of emotions, like different layers, like I described earlier. and a convolutional or generative, all different types of networks fighting with this internal struggle for the computer to decide how it feels in any given moment, given a stimulus. So you feed. I wanted a creative musical AI, but then what good is that if there's no listener? And you could have a room where there's a creative musical AI and then a a listening AI, two separate systems, each with their own vastly complicated rules. But the one that's listening decides how it should feel based on the other robot's music. I say robot loosely because it could all be done virtually, but I think really it should be done physically with two machines in the room, and maybe the servers are outside the room, something like that. But I haven't really heard anybody talk about generating emotions.
Yeah, I haven't
But
heard that.
I'm pretty sure it can be done, and I want to do it. And I want to see how the machines feel, and I want to have a musical concert when there's no actually humans involved. So
That sounds like it's
if I say that in a music building at college, I get a lot of weird looks. But I can say it here without fear of judgment. But they're like, "Why you want to do music without people?" And I'm like, maybe that's the problem. You don't know. Maybe we're getting in the way of what music really could be. We don't know.
Holding it back. So that's super fascinating, Manuel, to hear about. First off, I have to give you all kinds of kudos because these things are not easy. Like PyWT is a really complicated thing, super straightforward when you know what you're doing and you're familiar with the math and all those other things, but it's a little exciting to before you get to that point, and then taking that EEG data, slicing it up, how you train and the epochs. Keras isn't very easy. So it sounds like you got things to a pretty far level, and it seems like it's a very common experience to sort of take a question, get the pipeline built, put it in front of the neural network, realize that the results are so. This is certainly what happened with us. And then it kind of like motivates you to ask a different question and see how the results are. And we found that when you ask the right question, the accuracy in the training goes way up. And when you ask a question that the network can't really distinguish from the data you provide it, you'll be able to tell because it has a really low accuracy rate. So strangely enough, it's almost like the network will tell you whether it can answer that question or not. And if the reply is hazy, you just ask again later in a different way.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Joe. You're activating my basic emotions. We sure have more goals regarding that, and we need to still keep trying different views. Maybe we try another problem that is probably more easier to solve, and learn more things, and get in touch with more researchers, and be able to tell these conclusions, even though they aren't like the state of the art results. We definitely learned a lot, and joining the NeurotechX actually helped us way lot. Like getting into theory, getting into code, getting into all this stuff has been a real help.
And one more thing you might want to try before if you already have the data and you already have the pipeline and you already have the labels, try changing the labels from the 4 different states or the 4 different games to just the subject, because sometimes that can be interesting. Now, I'm not saying it'll work or it won't work, but if you say, okay, I don't care about what game they're playing, but here is which of the 20 subjects was playing it, that might, now 20 is tough because you're gonna have a low accuracy rate because random is 5%, but you might find that it's a very different question than what were they playing, but you might find that the network has a better answer for that.
That is interesting. We're definitely going to try that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about your project. And John, it would feel awful if we went through the whole meeting and I didn't ask you a question. I feel like somehow that's tradition. So I wanted to ask you if you had heard about Kernel's new Flux device and if you had any thoughts on it.
Hey, yeah, I can. I saw the notice that they had their announcement, and they did a video. Did you guys chat about that earlier?
Yeah, I mentioned it. I showed the announcement, but I was remarking that Kyle showed us that helmet and how like hardcore that tech was, and so I was just very fascinated to see that the reduction in form factor and also Kernel trying it. I was just curious. You're more familiar with that than I am. So, what's your level of skepticism versus excitement for it?
So what I'm going to have to say is ask me again next week, because I haven't seen the technical breakdown yet. But I can say that I've kind of passed that update around between like people I know who are working with OPMs, and that's in the MEG industry, and as far as it exists, is increasingly kind of turning its attention towards OPMs, and there's a lot of like kind of like indie research development activities going on. So a lot of people who are playing around with OPMs, and it's being facilitated by like a few key developments that have happened over the last few like 5 years or so, really. And I'm not aware, again, I haven't seen the technical tech specs yet, but the feedback that I've had from people who work in that has been like nothing new here. But you know, they might not have taken the time to check the breakdown yet. So I'll get back to you.
That's cool, and I'm not in any way skeptical. I was just surprised that the FNIRS product is very innovative and really incredible form factor and really incredible tech. So I was having a hard time wrapping my head around like, wait, so now they have a revolutionary OPM product as well? That seems like a lot, two very big different directions for a company.
Well, I mean, they really make sense to do together. I mean, it's kind of interesting that they came in doing this, because there was, you know, to some extent this was a phenomenon already. It's like the OPMs you know, development, like that's something that was happening anyway.
Right.
So Kernel are like riding this wave, and FNIR is like, I think more so it'd be reasonable to say they've given a big boost in terms of the form factor of the device,
right,
relative to, because you don't have like that massive set of cables. That's the massive difference with the flow. It's like it's still got a little USB-C, but it doesn't have the kind of like lawnmower man big set of optical cables going to a big emitter array that's like a giant fridge at the back of a room.
Do you know how long it's been since I thought about that movie? It's that's so awesome, because I'm like, wow, we are actually at the. All right, thank you, John, for that.
Right, yeah, right.
We're there.
I think it will take a little bit of time, probably a few months, for the release, the info that Kernel are now starting to bring out about their specific innovations in the OPM space to kind of propagate around the MEG OPM community, and for there to be a kind of a general view that on like what's new here and what's not. And like I said, there are things like what's the name of this company based in Colorado? Can't remember the name of this company, but they've had 3 generations of their OPM devices. The first ones were about yo big, like a few inches long, and then the second generation is about half of that. Then the third, so it's more like a kind of coin size,
Right.
and then the third generation of then that, but then they kind of slot in, so you can, like half of it is built into built into a cap,
right?
So that you can kind of it basically makes it more easy to do a kind of configurable EEG movable montage type setup with a limited number of channels, as opposed to like effectively having to redesign the cap every time you want to have a different montage. So those are things that have come from like one company who developed these OPM channels that have made a big difference over the last 5 years. And they're, some of that is physics, some of that is just the design. So yeah, again, like I don't know where the kernel innovations are coming in, but it's super interested to check out the video and talk more about it soon.
Cool. And can I ask you just a very general question about OPMs, simply because I'm still unfamiliar with the pragmatic and practical concerns. EEG, we've talked at length about all the things that are good and bad about it. Like if you move at all, no bueno, and if you don't have good contact, no bueno, and it's awful. FNIRS, really cool in terms of being able to see blood flow and cognitive load, but there was some difficulty with sort of the temporal resolution for a long time, and I think that's, in addition to the form factor, the flow tries to address the sample rate and the usability and the temporal resolution of FNIRS. I'm really unfamiliar with OPMs, and so like what are the pros and the cons of trying to measure things with OPMs from like a practical level, just at a high level?
Well, first thing is you need an MSR. You need a magnetically shielded room. So
that's an issue.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. What I did.
Wait a second. Is kernel using a shielded room for their thing they just announced?
Yeah. Like again, I haven't seen the technical breakdown, but I saw the picture, and the picture looked like it was a person I met, and like I scanned the page, and like this person was sat, and there was like something going through the back of the wall.
Yeah, they're in a chair, but they didn't say if the chair had to be made entirely of wood.
Yeah.
And that's... Yeah, see, that chair right there could be all wooden fabric. Can you have other pieces of metal?
But it's you see the wires going back out. It's going through the back of the wall there, right?
Is that it looks almost 3D printed?
Yeah. I mean, that thing looks just nuts.
Can you have other pieces of metal in a room with MEG, or is it like MRI? You can't have anything.
Yeah, no, you don't want to have anything in the MSR.
Okay.
So that's the biggest question mark, actually. Well, the two big questions that I have is what are any of the innovations in terms of the physics or the miniaturization or like mobile or anything, what any kind of wireless communication components that maybe they've kind of added in with any benefits. And the second thing that says the MSR, because in terms of just the pragmatics of doing MEG, like MRI, it's the two big things is with the traditional tech is the helium refills,
right,
and B, the fact that you need a special room. So you actually need to have, you need to decide wherever you're doing it, like, yes, we're going to do MEG here. You don't want to build it. You don't want to have a room that's like next to a main road or next to a subway or something.
Or an elevator.
And then you spend like $100,000+ sticking extra stuff in the walls to make a magnetically shielded room. And then my understanding is the current status with the OPMs is they need extra stuff added to an MSR. They need these things called nulling coils, because the OPM, the OPMs are sensitive to the absolute magnetic field of the ambient Earth's magnetic field, as opposed to just changes, which is what the traditional magnetometers are sensitive to, and that means that you need to kind of cancel out you need to build in these extra nulling coils on top of an MSR, which is another setup thing that you get this special gear from companies that will give you the stuff to install this, and then it's so that all of that adds up. I mean, if they have some genius way of getting around that, I'm super interested, but I'm not aware that it's an easy problem to solve, because there's people working with OPMs, and I feel like if the physicists who were doing work with OPMs could get around not having to use a magnetically shielded room, then I would know about it.
That's super informative. Well, I'm glad that I asked, even though you might not be. But thank you so much for those details, because that's exactly what I was looking to understand about OPMs. So thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, let's pick it up again when I'm a bit more informed.
Sounds great. Yeah, we can revisit it in a week or two.
But I'm really excited that they've started giving some more info on that, because I know they've had the product in the line for a while, and now they're starting to give us some juice.
Can you look at this picture that Ryan just shared in the chat? It's this huge rig, and it looks like they've just got one OPM sensor, and they're trying to. What are they doing, Ryan?
Oh, I think that guy lost a bet, if I'm looking at that photo right. Oh, sorry.
It's some huge rig, and it looks like they're looking at the effect of the Earth on the sensors themselves. You there, Ryan? Yeah. What are they trying to do there? Massive rig.
Well, that's quite the simulator setup that they've got there.
That's probably what the magnetically shielded room basically is.
Yeah, recording brain activities in an unshielded Earth's field with optically pumped magnometers. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Okay. Well, that's really interesting to know that those are the challenges around the tech. And I do remember Morgan talking about the UCSF elevator being a major enemy of their magnetic MRI experiments, because anytime it would go up and down, it would mess up their images.
The big thing that that is the development with this this kind of second generation or new generation of MEG. It's not really that it's going to be super mobile or anything. It's just that you don't need the liquid helium, and potentially you can have more of an EEG type montage that's like fixed to the head, as opposed to something that's fixed in space that you have to put the head in, where you then have to stay super close to it and super still, right? So it can kind of move around with you. So those are the two things that, and the cost, and yeah. So those are the things that are new, but it doesn't. It's not like OPMs like all of a sudden make kind of naturally lead to a consumer grade device.
Right.
It's an inch forward to that, but it's really still pretty kind of big budget stuff.
I was really fascinated to know about the shielding. Didn't know that about OPMs, and that seems like something one would need to solve for a consumer device.
Right. I mean, you can maybe KPMG can have their OPMs office on the floor of their whatever.
Yeah, like
you
a
can
car
imagine
company
that.
doing research. Exactly. All those things are fine.
Like they have an escape room, and they have an MSR, and they have a gym, whatever in that kind of tower block.
That's what I call benefits. So, okay, that's really awesome. Well, as hard as it may be to believe, we're getting close to the magic 9 o'clock hour. I'm sure that scheduling wise, everything is all rough, but we've got 10 minutes. Now's the time to showcase your best material. Tell us the gags you've been saving all week, or play us a clip of your upcoming SoundCloud EDM track that's going to light the world on fire.
I gave up that life, kind of. I'm doing software now. If you're hinting at me. No, Jaden did some EDM. Yeah, he could pull one out of his pocket if he really tried.
Yes, we checked the new people as well. All right, folks, let's try something ambitious. I think we've accomplished what we needed to accomplish for the week. I think we can call it a success. If anyone has any things that they would like to say or object to this union, now's the opportunity. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up the meeting and turn off the stream as well. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jenny. All right. Thanks for coming out, everyone. Wonderful to see you all, and we'll be back next week.
Thank you.